Russia's killed 500,000 Ukrainians. Russia has destroyed the Ukrainian economy. Russia is destroying Ukraine. What do you mean Russia hasn't done much? Russia's job was never to conquer Ukraine. Never to conquer Ukraine. So those people who put out there, well, Russia has failed to conquer Ukraine, have no clue what they're talking about. Russia's job has been to secure Russia. Russia is defined by more than just the borders of the Russian Federation. In a speech dating back to 2005, April 2005, I believe Vladimir Putin, speaking to the Federal Assembly, spoke about his responsibility as the leader of Russia, the Russian nation. And the Russian nation is comprised of the Russian people, people who share a common language, history, culture, religion. And Ukraine is full of the Russian nation. Now, Russia was willing to have the Russian nation live under the sovereign control of Ukraine. Those Russians who lived in Ukraine would live in Ukraine. Russia's always been supportive of that, but not when Ukraine launches a frontal attack against the Russian nation, the Russian people, the Russian language, the Russian culture, the Russian religion, which Ukraine has been doing for decades, since the nationalists came in power through the Orange Revolution in 2005. The world tends to forget this, what Ukraine, modern Ukraine, is about. It's about the Western empowerment of ultra-nationalistic trends in Ukraine to achieve the stripping away of Ukraine from the Russian sphere of interest, from the Russian orbit. Notice I didn't say strip it into the West, because Ukraine will never be part of the West. I don't know how many times I have to tell this to the Ukrainians out there. The West doesn't want you. The West doesn't like you. The West despises you. You're not one of them. You will never be part of the European Union, ever. They keep talking about meetings to talk about bridge, about the framework of the possibility of considering sometime in the future, if, when, and it will never happen. You are a tool being used by the West to achieve a strategic outcome that involves the defeat of Russia, not the embrace of Ukraine. But the Ukrainians have been captured by this ultra-nationalism that dates back to, pre-World War II, Stepan Bandera and people of his ilk, and ultra-nationalism that is premised on the notion of some sort of racial supremacy in Western Ukraine. They are superior racially to everybody else. The Russians are subhuman. The Poles are subhuman. Everybody's subhuman except the Western Ukrainians. And this is what has seized power, and it's perverted everything. It's perverted how the West views Ukraine. The notion of the United States Congress, and to show you the Jekyll and Hyde nature of the U.S. Congress, in 2015 passing an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act that says that U.S. taxpayer money cannot be used to fund training for the Azov Battalion because they are neo-Nazis and white supremacists. They sustained this argument, this line of thinking, this amendment up until 2022. After that, they just stopped talking about it. But now they've gone the other way around. We're going to fund the Azovs. We're going to fund the Nazis, but they're not really Nazis, you see. They're Ukrainian nationalists who have been fighting the Russians and the Soviets. They're anti-communists. That whole Nazi thing, that was just because they had no choice but to hang out with Hitler and the boys for a couple years. Because what were they supposed to do? They live in a tough neighborhood. You got a bad gang, you got a bad gang, pick a bad gang, join the bad gang, fight the bad gang. No, that doesn't work. That's total revisionism. Banderism has always been linked to Nazi Germany. The Nazi Germany, the fascist ideal, has always been at the soul of what the Banderas stand for. And yet that's the ideology that's at sway today. The United States Congress is supporting this. These are the realities that people have to understand when assessing what Vladimir Putin has put on the table in terms of this peace offering. It's not really a negotiation. The negotiation's already been had. That negotiation took place in good faith by the Russians back in the spring of 2022. That's when they sat down with the Ukrainians and tried to hash out a peace that, frankly speaking, when Vladimir Putin released the document and I read it, I was shocked that that is what the Russians would put on the table. Because There's not anybody outside of Vladimir Putin's inner circle that would have put that down. All the Russian experts I know, and I consider myself, well, maybe not a Russian expert. I don't want to elevate myself too high. I'm a specialist. I've been studying Russia for a long time. I've been studying Vladimir Putin for a long time. So I thought I had some insight into how this guy thinks. I was dead wrong. He is a far more pragmatic, responsible leader than even I thought, and I'm somebody who called him a pragmatic, responsible leader. This is a man who was seeking genuine solutions to an extraordinarily difficult problem. This is a man who was not seeking to take a pound of flesh from the Ukrainians. He was seeking to do that which he said back in 2005. I am the president of all Russia, and I'm here to protect the Russian people. And when the Ukrainian ultranationalists, empowered by the West, started to commit cultural genocide against the Russians, and then after 2014, actual genocide against the Russians, he had no choice but to step in. But even he, when he stepped in, he sought peace. What do you think Minsk was all about? In 2014, 2015, he didn't need to choose peace. He had actually surrounded the Ukrainian army, and Donetsk could have killed them all. He's there for the Russian people. The Ukrainians, empowered by the West, started confronting. So I thought that he would have been far more harsh on Ukraine than he was. But the terms of peace were extraordinarily reasonable. And it's still on the table today. That's what I don't think Ukraine and the West are quite comprehending, that this is the last great gift that Vladimir Putin can give them, the gift of a genuine peace that respects the existence of a sovereign, independent Ukraine. Yes, they can't be a member of NATO. They're never going to be a member of NATO. And whether they join the EU, that's an issue for further discussion, but the EU doesn't want them. We'll never have them. Ukraine, whether they know it or not, belongs in the Slavic orbit, the orbit of Belarus, of Russia, of Ukraine. Ukraine belongs in the Eurasian orbit. They're not a European power, never have been. And you know, that's their future, but that's a future that the Ukrainian people need to figure out for themselves. But they're not going to be part of NATO. Russia will never allow that to happen, can never allow that to happen. And we know why, because the West doesn't view Ukraine, again, they're not seeking to invite Ukraine into the member of the community to do this, that, and the other thing. They're using Ukraine as a base of operations to create the conditions for the strategic defeat of Russia. That's it. So Russia will never allow it to happen. Now, it's been made clear to the Ukrainians that if they reject this, as they have, and it's also been made clear to the West that if they reject it, and they will, we see a NATO summit coming up. I mean, the timing of Putin's statement before the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was genius, a pure genius, and it disrupted this peace conference, showed it for the sham that it is, and it'll totally undercut what's going on in NATO as they try to figure out how to justify spending hundreds of billions of dollars to rebuild a military that can't be rebuilt to confront a threat that doesn't exist. But then what will happen is that Russia will destroy Ukraine. And as they've said, the next time they talk, it will be unconditional terms of surrender. And that's the future. And those terms will be harsh. Right now, Ukraine will lose Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Lugansk. The next time Russia talks to them, they're going to lose Odessa, Kharkiv, Dnipropetrovsk, and Mykolaiv. And if they want to keep talking, Russia can keep moving. Sumy, that can go. Genetic, that can go. How far does Ukraine want to go? How far do they want to take this? If they turn this down, Ukraine will cease to exist as a modern nation state. When they lose access to the Black Sea, which they will lose when Odessa becomes a Russian city, and Putin has already said Odessa is a Russian city, but he's putting a marker on the table. It can be a Russian city under Ukrainian sovereignty, as long as the Ukrainians respect the Russians that live there. But Ukraine, right now, as it's currently configured, can't respect the Russians that live there. They've launched a frontal assault against the Russian Orthodox faith. They've desecrated extremely religious sites, holy sites in Kiev and elsewhere. They're attacking the Russian language, even in Odessa as we speak, a Russian city where Russian language is prevalent. Anybody who speaks Russian is being arrested and prosecuted for the crime of speaking Russian. This is unacceptable. Russia will never allow it. But if they lose Odessa, they lose access to the sea. If they lose Dnipropetrovsk, they lose industry. Mykolaiv, they lose industry. Kharkov, they lose industry. They've already lost the heart of their industry, the Donbass. So what's left of Ukraine? A dysfunctional agrarian rump state. That's it. And it will fester and suffer, and eventually it will have no choice but to seek to join the Slavic Union. And it will do so probably alongside elements of Moldova, which will break free. But they will always be minor components of this. Right now, Ukraine could become a major component of the Russian Union. But the nationalists won't let them. The West won't let them. The West it's not letting them because they're defending Ukrainian democracy, Ukrainian sovereignty. They won't let them because Ukraine is a tool. And the West is going to get all the bang out of this tool they can. They've invested hundreds of billions of dollars into this tool. This tool needs to perform. But the tool is broken, and like all broken tools, the cost of fixing it is too high, so it will be discarded. And that's the future of Ukraine, to be discarded on the trash heap of history. They have one chance to avoid that, accept the Russian peace proposal. So far, it looks like they're not. Nima, next week I'm holding a summit here in New York. You're invited. It's about going to Mars. And we're going to sit down and we're going to talk about going to Mars. I'm building a spaceport in my backyard, and I want you to help me design a rocket. We'll invite Larry Johnson, all your guests. We're all going to sit down. We're going to talk about it. And then we'll meet for a week, and then we'll put out a press report about how we're going to go to Mars and all the things we're going to do. How realistic is that concept of me going to Mars? I mean, it's not very realistic, right? Fantasy? That's the entire Switzerland summit. It's a meaningless event. It costs a lot of money to bring people together to say things that have no bearing whatsoever on anything. If you think Vladimir Putin sat up and listened when, Giorgia Meloni, breathlessly talked about, we're going to avoid the surrender of Italy's been next to Ukraine all along, and Putin's, oh my God, Italy's next to Ukraine. It's over. Belarus, it's over. Surrender now. Gerasimov, throw down your weapons. It's done. Italy is with Ukraine. Who cares? No one cares. Not in Russia. Lavrov doesn't care. Lavrov said the West doesn't matter. I don't care what the West thinks about Russia. The West has made itself irrelevant. There's nothing the West can do except commit suicide. And they can't even do that well. It's going to have to be an assisted suicide by the Russians. It's like, come here, let me hold your hands. Let me show you how it's done. Nuke, 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 nuke. It's so pathetic what happened there. Literally, parse it out. Nothing happened there. Nothing. Was Joe Biden there? I will always stand with Ukraine, except when Ukraine hosts a peace summit, and I won't be anywhere near there because I got to go stand on a stage at some fundraiser and look stupid while Barack Obama leads me off the stage because my brain doesn't work anymore. They sent Kamala Harris. She got there and took one look at it and said, I'm out here, Jake Sullivan, you got the show. And Jake Sullivan was there going, we promised we're going to be around, but we can't keep that promise. America will never stand next to Ukraine. No one stands with Ukraine. No one stands with Ukraine. No one stands with Ukraine. No one. Nobody. Not a single one of those nations that signed that. Even stupid Trudeau. Slow Ukraine, what a idiot. I mean, the stupidity of that and the emptiness, and it exposed the vacuous nature of the entire collective West. This was literally a showcase of stupidity. It accomplished nothing. It's the laughing stock of the world. Not one serious thing come out. Yes, they raised money and they threw money at Ukraine like they always do. I mean, I guess you could call Zelensky the greatest fundraiser that ever existed, but that money doesn't translate into anything but dead Ukrainians and tragically dead Russians too. It means dead people. People always talk about, U.S. dollars, is dead presidents. Going to stack the dead presidents. Well, we give enough dead presidents to Ukraine, they'll stack dead Ukrainians because that's all it's good for. Nothing good will come out of this. The other thing people aren't picking up on, I have, because like I said, I may not be a Russian expert, but I watch them pretty closely. And Putin has been very, very quiet about dates, calendar events. He doesn't like to put a calendar to things. And others have, and I've been listening to them. And people were saying, this May would see major changes on the battlefield. By the end of summer, we would see the collapse of the Ukrainian military. But Putin came in and he said something very interesting. He said, we could do that. Because remember, the guys I was looking to were military guys, and they're like me. I mean, give me a military mission, I'm going to accomplish it. I mean, we're going to go forward. We're going to be aggressive. We're going to close doors. We're going to destroy. And I'm going to kill you all. You may kill a bunch of my guys too. That's the way war goes. But I will win because I'm better than you. I'm going to. And then the Russians are looking at Ukraine saying, we can do this. The Russian military saying, we can do this. And Putin's saying, yeah, but at what cost? Well, it's going to cost us. Do we want that? Why do we want to do it now? Well, because then now's the favorable time. We can get in there and do this, that, and the other thing. By the end of summer, he's going, what's the rush? What's the rush? My economy's doing okay here. It's actually doing quite well. The more I produce, the further ahead I get of the West. The more I produce, the more the West becomes